Rely on me, for you know I'll take care of you. By DeviBlue. Summary. Chuuya was being weird. Not only his random timing, but his physical appearance as well. The large coat draped over his shoulders was pulled tightly around him, covering his arms, and there was a glistening of sweat on his forehead. There was also an odd expression on his face that Dazai had come to recognize as masked discomfort or pain. "Oh, what could you possibly need from me, puppy?" Chuuya flushed at the nickname, but didn't attempt to punch him or grab him. Very strange indeed. Dazai glanced at Chuuya's face once more. He was nervous, most likely of Dazai finding out whatever he was trying to hide. Or, Chuuya breaks his arm and goes to the one person who can force him to get help whether he likes it or not. Dazai's day had been going just fine. Was it the best? No. Was it the worst? Definitely not. Yet a certain chibi had to interrupt it, as he always did. It was in the middle of the day, too, when the ADA office door opened to reveal his ex-partner. Chuuya couldn't have been kind enough to give him a full day of contentment. "I need something from you," was the first thing Chuuya said as he stomped over to Dazai and used his ability to set up a chair next to Dazai's desk, then sat down. The mafioso paid no mind to Kunikita's shout of outrage at his unexpected presence. "It's fine, Kunikita. I can handle the slug," Dazai said with a winning smile, yet his eyes never left Chuuya. Chuuya was being weird. Not only his random timing, but his physical appearance as well. The large coat draped over his shoulders was pulled tightly around him, covering his arms, and there was a glisten of sweat on his forehead. There was also an odd expression on his face that Dazai had come to recognize as masked discomfort or pain. "Oh, what could you possibly need from me, puppy?" Chuuya flushed at the nickname, but didn't attempt to punch or grab him. Very strange indeed. Dazai glanced at Chuuya's face once more. He was nervous, most likely of Dazai finding out whatever he was trying to hide. "Nothing you can give me right now, bastard. I'll wait till you get off, so you can't skip and dump all your paperwork onto your coworkers," Chuuya said in a low voice, that Dazai was sure Chuuya was hoping came off more confident than it sounded. "Dazai, get this mafioso out of here!" Kunikita growled as he glared at Chuuya. Chuuya glared back, just as mean. Dazai ignored his coworker. He was more interested in his chibi at the moment and why he was being so... Realization dawned on Dazai, and a smirk slid onto his lips. His stupid slug. "Chuuya, why don't you show it to me already?" Dazai sang lightly. Now the nasty look was directed at him. "Fuck off, pretend like I'm not here." As if on cue, Dazai's phone rang. He glanced at the contact and made an innocent face and showed it to Chuuya. "I wonder why Ani-san would try to call me. What do you think, Slug?" "Don't answer that," Chuuya snapped as he reached for the phone, but quickly halted due to a wince. Dazai rolled his eyes and answered it, shoving his foot against Chuuya's chest as he did so that the other wouldn't try to snatch it. The motion earned a pained hiss from Chuuya. "Hello, Ani-san. To what do I owe this pleasure?" He paused as he listened. "Oh, is Chuuya missing, you say?" Chuuya shoved his knife against Dazai's throat, making Dazai smile. "No, he's not with me, but I'll be sure to let you know if I find him," he chirped, before hanging up the phone and lifting an eyebrow to Chuuya. "I covered for you. Now you owe me," the expression seemed to say. Chuuya scowled at Dazai, before calmly removing his coat. Kunikita shouted in alarm at the sight. Meanwhile, Dazai did nothing but laugh at his idiot ex-partner. "You really thought you could hide this? Chuuya's dumber than I thought." "It's not that bad," Chuuya grumbled. "Chuuya, your bone is in 2 pieces, and it looks like it's going to tear through your skin if the bruises are anything to go by." "Could be worse." Dazai sighed and shook his head, making Chuuya withdraw the knife closer to himself in warning. "Don't you fucking dare, Osamu." "Chuuya's arm can't stay like that for the rest of his life," Dazai said as his hand closed over the uncovered part of the hilt and tugged it out of Chuuya's hand. Chuuya barely fought it. "I'll make it work." "You would also get fired from your job, since you need that arm as the Mafia's top martial artist. And the Mafia doesn't fire people, so you'd simply be killed." Dazai's voice was cheery as he spoke, taunting the mafioso, who was acting more and more like a trapped animal by the minute. "I'm not going." Chuuya snarled. Dazai gave him an unimpressed look before gently poking Chuuya's bad arm, causing him to flinch and squeeze his eyes shut. "Bet that didn't hurt either, since we are telling lies anyway," Dazai drawled out. For the first time since their conversation had begun, Chuuya looked around him and saw all the eyes staring back. He quickly looked away and brought his eyes firmly to his lap. Chuuya's eyes hardened in a stubborn refusal to be anything but compliant, yet they both knew he'd already lost. Chuuya's voice dropped in volume as it struggled to stay steady. "You can't make me go." "Come on now, Chuuya, we both know that's not true." Dazai stood and patted Chuuya's head. Reflexively, the mafioso swatted it with his good arm. "I'll take you to a public hospital. You won't have to go to Mori." "No," Dazai continued as if he hadn't heard Chuuya. "I'll be in the waiting room the entire time and by your side when they put you under and when you wake." Chuuya shook his head. Dazai could practically feel how rapidly his ex-partner was disconnecting from the situation. Chuuya knew he wouldn't win this. From the moment he walked in the door, he knew, one way or another, that he would be receiving medical treatment. A medical procedure of some sort was unavoidable due to the severity of his injury, but the conscious part of his mind didn't want to believe it. However, some part of him, the smarter part, came to Dazai for help. Anything medical made him feel unsafe, and despite all these years, Dazai was still safe. Dazai would still protect him in his vulnerable moments. Besides, the ex-mafioso was probably the only person on the planet who could force him to do something he didn't want to do, if not just for his ability to cancel Chuuya's own. He was the only one who could ensure Chuuya would get the care he needed, even if the mafioso violently protested it. Chuuya knew all of this. Dazai pulled Chuuya's head against his hip and rubbed his neck in soft, reassuring movements. Chuuya, never one to give up though, fought it and shoved Dazai away from him. That is, after letting Dazai do it for a few moments, prior uninterrupted. "I volunteer at Yokohama's General Hospital. I can introduce you to the staff who will operate on you," Yoshino piped in. "That would be greatly appreciated, Yoshino-sensei," Dazai said with a grateful nod. "I'll call them and let them know to prepare for surgery. We leave in 5. Dazai grabbed Chuuya by the arm and led him out of the office, so they could get away from nosy eyes and ears. He leaned down in front of Chuuya and was met with glazed-over eyes. "Nobody wants anything from you at the hospital, just for your arm to be mended. And with Yoshino and I on watch, there won't be a single person who gets past us." Dazai sighed and pushed Chuuya's hair out of his face when he didn't respond. The redhead was taking long, measured, unsteady breaths as he tried to keep himself from dissolving completely into anxiety. Time for a little grounding, then. Swiftly, he plucked Chuuya's hat off his head, causing Chuuya's eyes to snap to Dazai the second his hat wasn't touching him anymore. Dazai hushed him before Chuuya burst with rage, making a show of taking off the headphones hanging around his neck and placing them on top of Chuuya's. Pulling out his phone, Dazai ignored Chuuya's scrutinization as he scrolled through his phone for a playlist he definitely didn't have specifically for Chuuya, and hummed in satisfaction when he found it. Once the music was on, Dazai tugged Chuuya forward, forcing him to walk to the car. Yoshino was already waiting in the driver's seat when Dazai slid into the back with Chuuya. "Don't make me," Chuuya mumbled, mouth too heavy and mind too jumbled to form complete thoughts. Dazai patted Chuuya's hand as the car started. As they made their way to the hospital, Chuuya became somewhat less foggy, leaning on Dazai's shoulder the entire time as he listened to familiar music, and squeezed Dazai's hand in a death grip. They pulled into the parking lot, and Yoshino went ahead to find her hospital co-workers and try to get Chuuya seen, or at least in a room, quicker. Dazai helped Chuuya out of the car, and they stayed there for a moment, not rushing to go inside. The sound of rushed, uncomfortable breathing drew Dazai's attention, and when he looked over at Chuuya, he saw his ex-partner standing with his eyes closed and leaning against the car, trying to keep quiet as his breath stuttered and broke. "You're having a panic attack, Slug," Dazai said as he brushed shoulders with Chuuya. "You're okay. Just a quick in and out surgery, then I'll take you home." Chuuya nodded in a jerky motion as he tried to calm down. Tried being the key word. After 10 minutes, Dazai regretfully informed Chuuya that it was time to go inside. The information was not well received. Chuuya shook his head, pressing his back firmer against the car. Dazai managed to wriggle an arm around Chuuya's shoulders before physically forcing him forward and towards the hospital building. I can't do this," Chuuya gasped as he attempted to resist Dazai's pulling. "Yes, you can. I'll be right with you the whole time before and after the surgery. An owner can't leave his dog after all." Chuuya didn't react to the comment, just planted his feet and refused to keep walking, even if that meant falling on his face due to Dazai trying to keep him moving. Dazai put his hands on his hips and pouted at Chuuya. "You're really going to make me carry you?" Chuuya flinched and stepped back. "I want to go home." "Chuuya, take me home," Chuuya demanded as his voice cracked. "Osamu, I want to go home." "We will, Slug, but no, now." Dazai huffed lightly in exasperation and stepped forward. The moment he reached for Chuuya, his ex-partner dropped onto his knees, trying to make it more difficult for Dazai to move or carry him. Childish as the behavior was, Dazai understood. It was a fear developed in his childhood, after all. Even if he didn't remember most of it, his body and mind did. Dazai crouched in front of him and reached to cup Chuuya's face in his hands. "I can't take Chuuya home yet. You know that," Dazai said softly. Chuuya shrugged as he looked off to the side. Dazai let his hands drop from Chuuya's face and snuck them under his good arm and around his torso so he could lift him up. Before Chuuya could protest, Dazai had him back to his feet. Then, quickly, he moved his hands around his torso so he could scoop Chuuya up in his arms. Chuuya wiggled for a moment, weakly trying to escape before slouching and giving up. The pain was catching up with him, which made Dazai wonder how long it had been since he received the injury. Usually it took a while for Chuuya to succumb and acknowledge the pain, stubborn as he was. The small trek from the parking lot to inside the hospital had Chuuya shaking as he clutched Dazai's trench coat with powerful, desperate strength, and hid his face against Dazai's shoulder, not wanting to see his surroundings. "You're all right. You're not in the lab. Nothing's going to happen to you, Chuuya." The words had little effect on Chuuya, as if he hadn't heard them at all. Yosuno was waiting in the lobby for them, eyes concerned and sympathetic, when they landed on him and Chuuya. When Dazai was next to her, she led them to Chuuya's room. "The nurses and doctors will be here as soon as they can," Yosuno said. "How long will that be?" Dazai asked. Yosuno frowned and pushed open the door. "Not sure. They're pretty busy right now." Great, so Chuuya was going to be stuck sitting in this hospital for who knows how long. "I can introduce them to you and Nakahara once they arrive." "I've worked with them before," Yosuno said. "He may not hear you," Dazai murmured before putting Chuuya on the bed and sitting next to him. He wasn't planning on letting go just yet. Not that Chuuya would let him with the death grip he had on Dazai. "Samu," Chuuya whispered. "Get me out of here, please." "Close your eyes, you're safe," Dazai murmured. Hearing Chuuya beg was never fun. His ex-partner was a prideful creature, and it usually took a great deal to get him to this point where he would even consider begging an option. Yet here he was, pleading with Dazai. It was all too soon before a nurse walked in, introducing herself to them and telling them that she needed to take Chuuya to get an x-ray done. "Can I come with him?" Dazai asked. Thankfully, the nurse, seeming to grasp their situation based on Chuuya's pale face, and how he refused to let go of Dazai, nodded and gestured for them to follow her. Dazai quite literally dragged Chuuya off the bed, wrapping an arm around the wrist of his good arm, and followed the nurse. Thankfully, taking the x-rays was a quick process, but Chuuya was still jumping out of his skin, flinching at any small movement and not allowing his back to be turned to the nurse. By the time they were done and back in their room, Dazai could tell Chuuya's pain had gotten worse. Not like the hat rack would tell him, but it showed in his grimace and the way he could barely concentrate enough to respond to Dazai's jabs. The nurse came back shortly after with the intent to put an IV in and give Chuuya pain medication before the surgery. "I don't want it," Chuuya gritted out. "Yes, you do, stupid slug. It's going to go in sooner or later. Rather sooner to help with the pain, eh?" "Dazai, I swear to God, I will break your fucking neck if you try to put anything in me," Chuuya hissed out as his eyes squeezed shut due to a sudden wave of pain. Dazai rolled his eyes and scoffed. "I'm truly terrified." He grabbed Chuuya's non-broken arm from where it was tucked in and held it out for the nurse. Dazai's other hand pressed over Chuuya's eyes and kept his head against his shoulder. The nurse took Chuuya's wrist and he immediately tensed. No, he gasped as he tried to pull his arm away. But due to Dazai's and Yoshino's, who had stepped in to help keep the mafioso still, grip was unable to. He thrashed against Dazai's side so violently, Dazai ended up yanking the mafioso onto his lap so they could hold him more securely. Dazai grunted in his attempts to hold Chuuya still. Chuuya was strong, and it was hard to keep him anywhere he didn't want to be. No doubt it didn't help that he was putting so much pressure on his horribly broken arm, only adding to the pain which added to the panic. Chuuya's head whipped back right into Dazai's nose, causing the detective to wince at the familiar trickle of blood out of his nostril, but still he held firm. The nurse was nothing if not a professional. She quickly found his vein, slid the needle in, and taped it down. The nurse gave Dazai a sympathetic look and then left the room, promising a doctor would be in soon. Chuuya, meanwhile, had yet to stop fighting like his life depended on it. "Chuuya, stop," Dazai said, as his partner got more and more worked up, desperate to get the damn thing out of his arm. When the mafioso didn't listen, Dazai grabbed his broken arm and squeezed it, making Chuuya cry out and bite his lip so hard it bled. "Stop." His hand lingered on Chuuya's broken arm, a warning and a reminder. An effective one, considering Chuuya finally slumped against Dazai, all the fight leaving his body. "I hate you," he whispered. "I hate you so fucking much." "The feeling's mutual, slug," Dazai said as he rested his chin on Chuuya's head, still hugging Chuuya against his chest. A woman in a white lab coat walked in, and Chuuya tensed all over again. His poor partner had to be exhausted at this point. He was running on pure adrenaline with no end in sight. "Hello, Nakahara-san," the woman said. "I'm Rei Suzuki. I will be performing your surgery today." She smiled at him, but he merely gave her a small jerk of his head and kept his eyes averted. Dazai was sure he would be glaring at her and spitting insults if not for Koyu's strict teachings. Suzuki pinned up a picture of Chuuya's x-rays, pointing out the break and informing him of the surgery they would need to perform. Wires and screws, and way too encouraging for Chuuya's anxious mind. "The team is ready to go. We're just waiting on the anesthesiologist," the doctor said. "I will be back shortly." She left the room and Chuuya shot up. "Where do you think you're going?" Dazai asked, somewhat amused. "I'm fucking leaving. No one is putting me under. No one is cutting me open. No one is putting fucking bolts and wires into my arm." Dazai shook his head in exasperation and stood, moving swiftly to place himself between Chuuya and the door. "Move." "This is happening. You're going into surgery to get your arm fixed up," Dazai stated bluntly, hands in his pockets as he stared into Chuuya's wild, hazed eyes. He looked so far away, yet so unwillingly in the present. "Osamu, I won't ask again. Move." His voice was trembling, as was his body. "Go sit on the bed, Chuuya." "I'm leaving." "Punch me." "What?" "Punch me, with your bad arm, and I'll let you leave. And not a half-assed punch, a nice powerful one." Chuuya stayed silent. They both knew he couldn't. Even if he tried to punch Dazai, it wouldn't hit hard enough to be anything more than a light touch. And even then, the consequences of that massively outweighed the benefits. His breathing was increasing again. Quick little hitches as he realized there was no way out of this. The surgery was going to happen, whether he wanted it to or not. He stumbled back, and Dazai guided him to sit down on the bed before he could trip over his own feet and injure himself further. "It'll be over before you know it," Dazai said as he patted Chuuya's knee. "I don't want this," Chuuya whispered again. "I want to go home. I want—" His voice faltered. "I just want to go home." Dazai sat next to him again, and Chuuya leaned on his shoulder. "You won't let them do anything?" Chuuya asked, voice breaking in his desperation for reassurance. "It's an owner's job to keep their dog safe, ni?" Chuuya stayed silent. Not that Dazai minded. He was more focused on keeping the mafioso in the room, more than anything else at the moment. Knowing his stupid slug, Chuuya would make a break for it the second Dazai looked away. Thankfully, it didn't take long for the doctor to come in with the anesthesiologist and vaguely explain what the surgery was. Dazai listened because he knew Chuuya wasn't. No, Chuuya was a heavy weight against his shoulder, mine checking out the longer the doctors were present. He didn't protest or fight when Dazai helped him lay back on the bed, rather than be sitting up. When he tried to pull away, a hand shot out to grip Dazai's own, excruciatingly painful and tight, frantic, scared. Dazai gave the hand a squeeze back, and, to his confusion, Chuuya let go of his hand. However, their distance didn't last long, as Chuuya's fingers moved to his wrist. S-O-S. S-O-S. S. Shh, you're safe. You're okay. Dazai murmured as he took Chuuya's hand between his own. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the anesthesiologist changing the IV bag before she pulled out an oxygen mask. Her eyes met Dazai's and he held his hand out for the mask. "Please, allow me." She hesitated before handing it over. Smart woman. Chuuya's nerves were easy to detect when he was pale as a sheet and sweaty, and Dazai knew it would not go over well if a stranger attempted to put something on his face. He let go of Chuuya's hand, which unsurprisingly didn't go over too well, as Chuuya's eyes shut tight, and the hand on his non-broken arm balled up in his lap. Dazai carefully pressed the mask to his face, holding it there when Chuuya grabbed his wrist and attempted to shove it away. "It's an oxygen mask," Dazai said, as calm and soothing as he could. As expected, though, Chuuya wasn't easily swayed. His grip did not loosen, so Dazai sighed and lowered his hand. "Chuuya's being so difficult. It's just air, silly dog." "I don't care about the fucking mask," Chuuya hissed viciously, and while Dazai knew he really did care about the mask, he also knew what Chuuya was trying to say. He was more scared, terrified even, of everything that came after. When he'd be alone in a room full of doctors, unconscious and vulnerable. Dazai pressed the mask to his face again, holding it firm as he took the strap and secured it on Chuuya's head. Deep breaths. Chuuya glared at him, yet forced his hand into Dazai's again. Dazai smiled and leaned closer to the mafioso. "Chuuya's gonna take such a good little nap. A puppy like you exerts so much energy after all." Oh, if looks could kill, Dazai would be in hell. Dazai's smile merely grew. "Maybe those pesky eye bags of yours will finally go away." Chuuya blinked at him heavily, once, twice. The medication was starting to kick in. His eyes fluttered closed again, and this time didn't open. Dazai held his limp hand one moment longer. Despite knowing Chuuya wouldn't hear him, he still said, "I'll be here when you wake up." "Dazai-san, if you could please join Yosuno-sensei in the waiting room. We will inform you when his surgery's over." Dazai nodded, for once not being everyone's problem, and listened to her instructions. He left the room, sparing one last glance at Chuuya before walking down the hall. Yosuno was sitting there, phone in hand and typing on it. "Yosuno-sensei," Dazai greeted as he sat next to her. "He's quite a handful," she remarked. Dazai laughed lightly. She wasn't wrong about that one. His slug always made things as difficult as possible for him. So, why you? Her eyes were heavy on him, curious, maybe a little wary, but he didn't give her the satisfaction of looking uncomfortable. Chuuya has a very strong ability, and a very strong dislike of hospitals. In case you couldn't tell by the last 30 minutes. Yosuno rolled her eyes at him. His ability will instinctually lash out at anyone who tries to fix him. Except you. Believe me, if he could, he would, Dazai said with a fond huff. That stupid dog knows he needed the surgery, and he knows he couldn't use his ability to keep me from getting him there. He trusts you, Yosuno said quietly. It sounded oddly like an accusation. We met at 15, and we're partners since then. If we didn't have at least a little trust, then we'd both be dead. But he still trusts you. Why? Yosuno pressed. It's a trust that will never die. It can't. Not after everything they've been through. Not after corruption or near-death experiences, nor the weight of being a child soldier that no one else could relate to. They only had each other, even if they both despised it at the time. Now, Dazai was only fond looking back at his memories with Chuuya. He didn't say any of this to Yosuno, though. Instead, he answered with a simple shrug. The doctor didn't seem complacent with the answer, and he wasn't sure if she'd try to wiggle more out of him later. But for now, she accepted it enough to let him be. Still, she didn't seem to be completely at ease. Out with what you want to say. You seem to care about him, she said carefully. Are you questioning my loyalty to the agency, Sensei? He asked, a sharp edge to his words. I'm just making an observation, Dazai-kun. Her response was light and unconcerned, yet he didn't know how to reply, so he didn't. They sat quietly, side by side, not an awkward silence, per se, but not exactly a comfortable one either. You don't have to stay, Dazai said at some point. When Chuuya got out of surgery, Dazai didn't want her to see the aftermath. Besides, he just planned to take Chuuya home, which would only raise more suspicions in the doctor's eyes. Would you like me to leave? As much as I enjoy your company, Yosuno-sensei, I can handle him from here. She rose from her seat, not putting up a fight. Then I'll see you tomorrow, Dazai-kun. Take care of him. The second sentence was added on hesitantly. The conflicting feelings in her regarding Chuuya were sure to make any thoughts toward him difficult at the moment. She'd fought him. She knew how powerful he was and how loyal he was to the person she despised most. But she also saw how scared he was, how small he appeared despite his loud presence. Dazai gave her a last wave before slumping in his chair. What a mess. He was sure he'd be kissing her ass for the next few months. Maybe he'd make Chuuya send her some nice expensive wine. It was only a few long hours before he was called back into Chuuya's room. The mafioso was still asleep when he entered the room, thankfully, and there was a bulky cast on his arm that made a smile rise on Dazai's lips. He'd be sure to take as many opportunities to make fun of Chuuya as he could in the next couple of weeks. However, it was too soon to have fun. First, he had to speak with the nurses to get Chuuya discharged as soon as possible. The faster they were out of the hospital, the better. It wasn't long after he talked to the nurse that he heard a shuffling behind him and looked over to see Chuuya waking up. Dazai walked over to the bed and sat on the chair beside it before he took the slug's hand in his, purely to keep Chuuya from bringing down the hospital when he woke up, of course. Chuuya's eyes opened slowly, and he blinked a few times, processing as his brain adjusted to being drugged and awake. Chuuya's awake, I see, Dazai said. Those sluggish eyes dragged over to Dazai, then to the monitor positioned behind him, tracking Chuuya's vitals. Are we in a hospital? Chuuya mumbled as his eyes closed again. They must have used a strong medicine if Chuuya was still so out of it and sleepy. Yes, but we will leave soon. Now, Chuuya asked as he turned towards Dazai on his side and curled up in on their joined hands, eyes still closed. It was hard to ignore his beating heart at the moment. Yet Dazai tried in vain to do it. Before Dazai could respond, Chuuya grumbled, "Take me home, stupid fish." Who was Dazai to deny him? Dazai sighed dramatically. "Chuuya's so demanding." Getting Chuuya back into his clothes was a task in itself, due to the mafioso being half asleep and absolutely no help at all. Getting Chuuya out the door and to the taxi Dazai had called was slightly easier. Did Chuuya try to walk? Yeah, he did. Did Chuuya promptly almost eat shit? Also yes. Dazai ended up picking Chuuya up and grunting at his weight. Chuuya was again no help, and Dazai wasn't sure if that was on purpose as revenge or if he genuinely was too drugged to do anything. Maybe a combination of both. After shoving Chuuya into the taxi, Dazai climbed in and rattled off Chuuya's address to the driver. "Chuuya better not fall asleep and get his slug drool all over me," Dazai muttered when Chuuya's head leaned against him. His statement was ignored. Dazai grimaced as he felt wetness against his shoulder. Despite that, Dazai didn't shove Chuuya off him. The car ride couldn't end sooner, though, and before long Dazai was lugging Chuuya up to his apartment. He punched in the code, breathing heavier than normal as he did. Sue him for being tired after carrying Chuuya and having to free a hand to get him inside. He could have sworn he felt Chuuya's small, smug smile against his shoulder. "Chuuya always makes me do so much work," Dazai grunted as he entered the apartment and then closed the door behind them. He kicked his shoes off before walking further down the hall to Chuuya's room. It had been a while since he'd been in Chuuya's room. Not the entire apartment, though, due to his habit of breaking in. But it was still familiar. No furniture had been moved, nor the bed sheets changed, and it still smelled like Chuuya. Dazai wondered if this was what coming home felt like. He shoved the thought into a box far in his mind labeled "Never ever think about again," and dropped his partner onto the bed, making Chuuya grunt. "There! Chuuya's all settled in," Dazai proclaimed with a stupid, stretched grin on his face before he turned around with the intention to leave. He couldn't stand being here any longer. He'd do something he'd regret. Like, stay. "Osamu," Chuuya murmured, and it truly wasn't fair, the power that one word had coming out of Chuuya's mouth. Dazai sighed loudly and turned back around. He made the mistake of looking at Chuuya, who was staring back at him with tired, longing eyes. "What now, can't you see?" "Stay." Dazai shut his mouth, jaw clenching tightly. He knew Chuuya would ask, he knew, and yet it still hurt. It was still a shock. "You know I can't." "I know you won't," Chuuya replied in a mumbled, dejected whisper. Dazai thinks he'd prefer a bullet in his foot. That would hurt less. He could handle a bullet. This situation, though, it was impossible. "You made me go to the hospital," Chuuya said, each word pushed out as he fought his exhaustion. "You owe me." And Dazai made another mistake. He walked back over to Chuuya's bed and sat down on it, hesitantly laying a hand on Chuuya's head. Chuuya melted into the touch like a cat basking in the warmth of the sun. "You knew I would. That's why you came to me," Dazai said as he dared to let his fingers run through Chuuya's hair. Chuuya made a noise of disagreement. Dazai forgot how cute it was when he was high on pain meds. Despite knowing how much he would regret this, Dazai lifted his legs onto the bed and let himself slide down to lay next to Chuuya. Chuuya's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're staying?" "My puppy needs me," Dazai replied as he snaked an arm under Chuuya's head and pulled the mafioso close. "I'd be a bad owner if I left him alone." "Not your dog, asshole." The remark was half-hearted at best, weakened by the way he shuffled to press himself further into Dazai. Dazai hummed in lazy acknowledgement of Chuuya's words. Everything quieted, and all he could focus on was Chuuya, his puffs of breath against his chest, his legs tangled with Dazai's own, his easy affection and comfort with a creature such as Dazai. When Dazai was sure Chuuya was asleep, he ran his knuckle against Chuuya's cheek and allowed himself to admire the man. In the safety of Chuuya's bedroom, he could allow the overwhelming love he felt for the mafioso to leak out just enough to keep it manageable. What tomorrow held was unknown. Would Chuuya kick him out and yell at him? Or the scarier option, would Chuuya let him stay? Would they spend all morning lazing around and existing as they used to? Dazai closed his eyes. He didn't have to think about tomorrow yet. For now, he could just let his mind drift as Chuuya's warmth thawed him.